In the shadow of gilded thrones and ancient stone walls, secrets fester. Behind the ceremonial splendor and carefully orchestrated public appearances lies a history soaked in blood, betrayal, and scandal. For over 1,000 years, the British monarchy has captivated the world, not just through pageantry and power, but through the darkest impulses of human nature: ambition, lust, murder, and conspiracy. Even in the 21st century, when many argue that monarchy itself is an outdated relic of a bygone age, the mere whisper of royal scandal sends the global press into a frenzy. Newspapers that secure a royal exclusive witness, their circulation numbers skyrocket overnight. The fascination remains undiminished, as potent today as it was centuries ago. But why? What is it about these privileged families that holds humanity in such thrall? The answer lies not in the crowns they wear, but in the crimes they commit, the scandals they cannot hide, the conspiracies that refuse to stay buried. This is the story of how power corrupts, how succession breeds murder, and how the pursuit of the throne has left a trail of bodies stretching back through the mists of time. Warriors and conquest. The story begins in ancient times, when the British Isles were a patchwork of warring tribes, and the concept of a unified kingdom existed only in the dreams of ambitious warlords. To become king or queen in those brutal early days required more than noble blood. It demanded the strength to seize power by force and the ruthlessness to defend it against all challengers. The crown was not inherited through ceremony, but won through violence. In 43 AD, the Roman legions arrived in force, bringing with them an empire's ambition and military might. The ancient Britons fought desperately to resist this foreign invasion, and among their fiercest warriors was Queen Boudica, whose name would echo through history. This mighty warrior queen led her people in a savage rebellion against Roman occupation, unleashing fury upon the invaders and giving them a fight they would never forget. Though her uprising was ultimately crushed, Boudica's courage became legend, a reminder that even in defeat, resistance could achieve immortality. The Romans brought more than conquest to British shores. They brought sophistication, infrastructure, and a gift for political intrigue that would reshape the nature of power itself. Their straight roads cut through the landscape like scars, their architectural marvels rose from the earth, and their bathhouses became centers of culture and commerce. But they also brought something more sinister: the art of conspiracy. Julius Caesar himself, the man who first set foot on British soil and declared, "I came, I saw, I conquered," met a fate that would become synonymous with political betrayal. On the steps of the Roman Forum, surrounded by men he considered trusted allies, Caesar was stabbed 23 times. His assassination stands as history's most famous conspiracy, a reminder that even the most powerful can fall when those closest to them turn traitor. As scandals and conspiracies became woven into the fabric of the Roman Empire, corruption festered at its heart. By the 5th century AD, Rome's grip on Britain loosened and finally broke. As the legions departed, they left behind a power vacuum that would soon be filled by new invaders hungry for land and dominion. Blood and succession, the Saxons arrived like a storm, and for 2 centuries they waged relentless war against the native Celtic peoples, driving them north into Scotland and west into Wales. The land that would become England fractured into 7 separate kingdoms, each ruled by warrior kings who eyed their neighbors' territories with barely concealed greed. This was the age of the sword, when disputes were settled through bloodshed and the strongest warrior claimed dominion over the weak. Eventually, one king rose above the rest. Egbert of Wessex, through a combination of military prowess and political cunning, became the first acknowledged king of all England in the year 829. His achievement marked a turning point in British history, for when Egbert died, something unprecedented occurred. His sons and grandsons inherited the throne through succession rather than conquest. The principle of hereditary monarchy had taken root. But this new system brought its own dangers. For every legitimate heir who ascended peacefully, there lurked ambitious relatives who believed the crown should be theirs. The potential for conspiracy multiplied exponentially. Suddenly, murder could be disguised as natural death. Poison could replace the sword, and the greatest threat to a sitting monarch was no longer the foreign invader at the gates, but the family members sharing their dinner table. The Norman Conquest, the year 1066, stands as one of the most significant dates in English history, forever associated with the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest. But the battle itself was merely the violent conclusion to a conspiracy that began years earlier, when King Edward the Confessor made a catastrophic error in judgment. Edward died childless, but before his death, he made a promise. Or rather, according to conspiracy theorists, he made two promises. His brother-in-law, Harold, claimed the dying king had named him as heir. But across the English Channel in Normandy, Duke William insisted that Edward had promised the throne to him years earlier. Whether Edward deliberately played these two men against each other, or whether miscommunication led to this disaster, the result was inevitable war. Harold moved quickly, seizing the crown before William could react. But the Duke of Normandy would not accept this betrayal. He assembled an invasion force, crossed the Channel, and met Harold's army on the battlefield at Hastings. When the day ended, Harold lay dead, legend says with an arrow through his eye, and William had earned his place in history as William the Conqueror. The Norman Conquest changed everything. William replaced the English aristocracy with Norman nobles loyal only to him, transforming the nation's power structure overnight. French became the language of court, Norman law supplanted Anglo-Saxon tradition, and the conquered English found themselves subjugated in their own land. William ruled with an iron fist, dividing his time between England and his holdings in Normandy, always alert for signs of rebellion. But William faced the same problem that haunted all medieval monarchs: mortality. He could not live forever, and despite having multiple sons, he doubted his eldest possessed the ruthlessness required to hold England. So William made a fateful decision. He chose his third son, also named William, to inherit the English throne. This decision planted the seeds of conspiracy. When William the Conqueror died in France, his son William II became king. But his reign ended under mysterious circumstances, and with suspicious speed, his brother Henry I seized the crown. Had Henry orchestrated his brother's death? The question has never been satisfactorily answered, but the convenience of the timing suggests that fratricide may have smoothed Henry's path to power. The Robin Hood legend, the most famous example of royal brothers locked in bitter rivalry, involves two names that have become cultural icons: Richard the Lionheart and his younger brother, John. Their story has been told and retold for centuries, most famously in the legend of Robin Hood, where Richard is cast as the noble hero and John as the villainous usurper. According to legend, when Richard departed for the Crusades to fight in the Holy Land, his brother John seized control of England in his absence. John raised crushing taxes to fill his personal coffers, leaving the common people destitute and starving. He confiscated the lands of nobles fighting alongside Richard, enriching himself while betraying those who served the crown. Into this darkness rode Robin of Locksley, a nobleman turned outlaw, who gathered a band of followers in Sherwood Forest and waged a guerrilla war against John's tyranny. Robin and his merry men stole from John's corrupt officials and distributed the wealth to the suffering poor, becoming heroes to the oppressed masses. When Richard finally returned from his crusade, he swept John from power and restored justice to the realm. It is a magnificent story, one that has inspired countless books, films, and television shows. Richard the Lionheart has been immortalized as one of England's greatest kings, while John is remembered as Bad King John, a tyrant whose cruelty knew no bounds. But like so many legends, this one is built on foundations of selective truth and deliberate fiction. The historical reality paints a far more complex picture. Richard, despite his glorious reputation, spent barely 7 months in England during his 10-year reign. He was absent for his coronation feast, absent while collecting crushing taxes to fund his crusades, and absent when those same taxes impoverished his subjects. It was Richard, not John, who bled England dry to finance his military adventures. When Richard was captured by the Holy Roman Emperor and held for ransom, even more money had to be extracted from an already suffering population. Whether John played any role in his brother's capture remains a matter of speculation and conspiracy theory. What is certain is that Richard produced no legitimate heirs, largely because he was never present long enough to father children. When Richard died in 1199, the crown passed to John by default. King John faced immediate rebellion from nobles who resented his authority. They forced him to sign the Magna Carta, a document that limited royal power and established principles that would influence democratic government for centuries to come. This, not the Robin Hood legend, is John's true historical legacy. The fair assessment is that Richard was not entirely good and John was not entirely evil, but humanity has always preferred clear heroes and villains, and so the legend endures, more powerful than truth. Murder most fool. If conspiracy theories swirled around the succession disputes of earlier kings, they became a hurricane during the reign of Edward II. His father, Edward I, known as Longshanks for his impressive height, was a warrior king who conquered Wales and attempted to subjugate Scotland. His military campaigns and political ruthlessness became legendary, immortalized in films like Braveheart. But Edward I's son could not have been more different from his formidable father. Edward II showed little interest in military conquest or the harsh masculine culture of medieval warfare. His homosexuality, though never explicitly acknowledged, was evident to his contemporaries and became a source of tension with his father and later with his nobles. Forced to fulfill his duty, Edward married Isabella of France and produced 4 children, despite his obvious preference for male companionship. But Isabella, known to history as the she-wolf of France, would not tolerate being ignored. When she fell in love with Roger Mortimer, a sworn enemy of the king, the couple orchestrated a conspiracy that would end in one of history's most horrific murders. Isabella and Mortimer deposed Edward, seizing power in the name of the young prince who would become Edward III. They imprisoned the deposed king in a cell at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where his captors attempted to kill him through exposure to toxic fumes from a cesspit beneath his prison. When that failed, they resorted to a method specifically designed to humiliate homosexual men. Edward II was murdered by having a red, hot poker inserted into his body, causing internal injuries that left no external marks. The brutality of this execution, ordered by his own wife, stands as one of the darkest moments in royal history. Ironically, when their son Edward III came of age, he overthrew his mother and Mortimer, executing the man who had helped murder his father. Edward III would go on to become one of England's most respected monarchs, proving that the sins of the parents need not doom the child. The princes in the Tower of London, that ancient fortress on the Thames, has witnessed more than its share of royal tragedy. But few mysteries have captured public imagination like the disappearance of the 2 young princes in 1483. When King Edward IV died, he left behind 2 sons, 12-year-old Edward and 9-year-old Richard. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was appointed as their protector. The boys were moved to the Tower of London, ostensibly for their safety, while preparations were made for the elder boy's coronation as Edward V. But the coronation never happened. The princes were seen less and less frequently in the Tower grounds. Then, in September of 1483, they vanished completely. No bodies were discovered, no official explanation was given. The finger of suspicion pointed directly at their uncle, who had by then declared himself King Richard III. For centuries, the fate of the princes in the Tower has been debated. Were they murdered on Richard's orders? Did they die of natural causes? Were they spirited away to live in secret exile? In 1674, workmen renovating the tower discovered a wooden box containing the skeletons of 2 children. Were these the lost princes? The mystery remains unsolved. William Shakespeare's play about Richard III portrayed him as a murderous villain, a hunchbacked monster who killed his way to the throne. Many historians now believe Shakespeare's characterization was propaganda designed to please the Tudor monarchs who had defeated Richard in battle. But whether villain or victim of historical slander, Richard III's reign lasted only 2 years before he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. The victor of that battle, Henry Tudor, became King Henry VII and founded a new royal dynasty. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who would transform royal scandal into an art form. The king of scandal history remembers Henry VIII primarily for his 6 wives, but the real obsession driving the king's marital carousel was not lust, it was succession. Henry needed a legitimate male heir, and his desperation to produce one would reshape English religion, politics, and society. When Henry inherited the throne, he also inherited his dead brother Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon. With a special dispensation from the Pope, they married. But despite numerous pregnancies, Catherine produced only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary. As Catherine aged beyond childbearing years, Henry's eyes wandered to the young and captivating Anne Boleyn. Henry requested that the Pope annul his marriage to Catherine, but the Pope refused. Unwilling to accept this denial, Henry made a revolutionary decision. He broke from the Catholic Church entirely, established himself as head of a new Church of England, and granted himself a divorce. He married the pregnant Anne Boleyn, but once again, the child was a girl, Elizabeth. When subsequent pregnancies failed to produce a son, Henry had Anne arrested on charges of adultery and executed. His next wife, Jane Seymour, finally gave him the son he craved, but she died shortly after childbirth. Henry continued his pattern of marriage, divorce, and execution, accumulating 6 wives total before his own death in 1547. Despite all his efforts, the succession he left behind was unstable at best. His son Edward died at 15, plunging England into a brief succession crisis that saw the teenage Lady Jane Grey manipulated onto the throne for just 9 days before being executed. Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots. After the turmoil of Henry's reign and the 9-day tragedy of Lady Jane Grey, England found itself ruled by Henry's eldest daughter, Mary. A devout Catholic, she attempted to restore England to Rome, earning the nickname Bloody Mary for her persecution of Protestants. When Mary died childless, the throne passed to her half-sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth I declared religious tolerance, but as Catholic conspiracies against her multiplied, she was forced to outlaw Catholicism entirely. Catholic priests traveled in secret, celebrating illegal masses in hidden chambers built into the great houses of noble families who remained loyal to Rome. These priest holes were architectural marvels of concealment, and many priests owed their lives to these cramped hiding spaces, or even that he was secretly committed to an asylum for madness. Edward VII and the modern age Queen Victoria ruled for 63 years and 7 months, and her eldest son had to wait until age 59 to become king. When Edward VII finally ascended in 1901, the Victorian age of surface respectability gave way to the Edwardian era of glittering society and barely concealed scandal. Edward kept numerous mistresses throughout his marriage to the beautiful and tolerant Alexandra of Denmark. Actresses like Lily Langtry and Sarah Bernhardt joined his stable of companions, as did American beauty Jenny Jerome, who would become Lady Randolph Churchill and mother to Winston Churchill. Edward's last mistress, Alice Keppel, was even admitted to his deathbed by Queen Alexandra in 1910. When Edward died, his son George V brought stability back to the monarchy, but George correctly predicted that his own eldest son would prove problematic. The king warned Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin that the boy would ruin himself within 12 months of becoming king. The abdication crisis, George V died in January 1936, and his son became King Edward VIII. 11 months later, Edward announced his intention to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson, provoking a constitutional crisis. Rather than abandon the woman he loved, Edward abdicated on December 11, 1936, having reigned for less than a year. His brother became King George VI, and though the monarchy was shaken, it survived. George and his family stood with Londoners during the Blitz, enduring Hitler's bombing campaigns. When the war ended, the royal family had restored public faith in the institution. George died in 1952, and his daughter became Queen Elizabeth II, beginning a reign defined by duty and service. The final tragedy in 1981, Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral. The world watched the fairy tale wedding, believing the succession was secure and a new era of royal happiness had begun. But by the 1990s, the marriage had collapsed in spectacular fashion. The separation and divorce played out in the media, with Diana becoming the most beloved royal while Charles faced public anger over his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. Ironically, Camilla is the great-granddaughter of Alice Keppel, Edward VII's mistress, history repeating itself. On August 31, 1997, Diana died in a car crash in a Paris tunnel. Official findings declared it a tragic accident, but conspiracy theories persist. How did the princess die so unexpectedly? Why were there so many unanswered questions? Diana now rests on an island at her family's estate at Althorpe, but the mysteries surrounding her death continue to fuel speculation and investigation. From ancient Britons to modern royals, from Boudica's rebellion to Diana's tragedy, the British monarchy has been defined as much by scandal and conspiracy as by pageantry and power. Each generation discovers that behind the crown lies humanity in all its darkness, ambition, lust, betrayal, and murder. The pattern repeats endlessly. Succession breeds conflict, power corrupts absolutely, and those closest to the throne are often the greatest danger. Yet despite centuries of scandal, the monarchy endures, adapting to survive each crisis, each abdication, each tragedy. Perhaps that is the ultimate conspiracy, that an institution built on violence and maintained through ruthlessness has convinced the world it represents tradition, stability, and dignity. The truth, as this journey through history reveals, is far darker and infinitely more fascinating. As we've learned, a good story never dies. It only improves with keeping and retelling. The scandals may be centuries old, but they continue to captivate us, reminding us that power has always been a dangerous game, and those who seek the crown must be prepared to pay its terrible price. Thank you for joining this exploration of royal secrets and conspiracies. If you found this journey through history as compelling as we did, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary investigation. Now we want to hear from you. Which royal scandal or conspiracy from this documentary shocked you the most? And do you believe there are secrets about the monarchy that still remain hidden today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. History is full of mysteries, and together, we can keep exploring the darkness behind the crown. Until next time, remember, the most powerful stories are often the ones they tried to bury.